Proposition 203 would legalize and regulate the use of medical marijuana here in Arizona. Most libertarians I know are leaning in favor of that. Most of the conservatives I know have some issues with that. Where you stand depends probably on where you are. Also, anybody who's dealt with cancer and has actually known people who have tried to do medical marijuana for some of these ailments, your sympathies are probably going to be in a different direction on that. One thing I would say is that I don't think, I'm fairly libertarian on a lot of stuff. This was not exactly written by libertarians. There's a provision in there that would make it so that you cannot discriminate against medical marijuana users if you're an apartment owner and you're going to rent to somebody, if you're an employer and you want to hire somebody. That kind of rubs my libertarian property rights sensibilities wrong. That's an issue with this. Of course, you know, people who really, really want to legalize medical marijuana are probably going to look at it the other way and say, well, okay, but they don't want. I understand if you're a medical marijuana user and you have a true condition, it really is something that that you've got a bad condition, and I could understand why you don't want to be discriminated against when you go to your employer or you go to an apartment owner. I understand that, but the reality of, in my world, property rights is that you ought to have that freedom to discriminate. In an ideal world, you ought to have that freedom. Yes,
I would like to check medical use. So this is so-called medical. It will be more accessible to everybody. People can make up reasons too.
Right. Conservatives who are opposed to the legalization or decriminalization or softening on the war on drugs, people who are thinking in that vein, obviously see a threat here in a lot of reasons. Even if this was so tightly regulated that only true medical conditions got use, people with true medical conditions, it would still have the cultural effect, I think, of bringing marijuana in and, I wouldn't say popularizing, but at least bringing it in, possibly making the public more comfortable with it. So if you're a drug warrior and you really don't want medical, or you don't want marijuana legalized, this is not your proposition, obviously. People on the other side are going to feel very differently, and some libertarians who are very much in favor of drug legalization are going to like this, even though they're not too fond of the discrimination, the anti-discrimination provisions that we talked about. Yes, sir.
If you put it in brownies, how would anybody know? Don't ask, don't tell.
And there's admittedly a lot of gray areas in this bill. One of the questions is, THC stays in your bloodstream for a month. And so the question is, anybody you pull over, if a medical marijuana uses medical marijuana 12 times a year, and they get pulled over, they're going to have marijuana in their system. So parts of provision in this bill, conservatives especially, are concerned that it would basically get people out of the charge of driving while stoned. The protections for medical marijuana users will basically create an ability for lots of people to drive around stoned. I think you got to look. It's really hard to tell when legislation is passed how much of an impact it's going to have. Exactly, how far that's going to go. Yes, sir.
Well, my sister-in-law lives in Colorado, and she says that they have this law there that it's just out of hand. So it's just incredible how it was intended and where it's gone to today.
I think the defense. I don't know what's happening in Colorado, but I know if you go to California, we're supposed to have 120 roughly dispensaries. Roughly, it's on a sliding scale, but we're supposed to have about 120 medical marijuana dispensaries in Arizona if this passes. There's got to be 120 medical marijuana dispensaries in South Central Long Beach, part of LA. I mean, there's a lot. There's probably that many in Venice Beach. And a lot of people there say, hey, it's everywhere. It creates a certain cultural element. It creates a certain criminal element. There's a lot of arguments. The people who designed this version, the Arizona version, they were answering that criticism by limiting it to 120, or at least they think they've answered that criticism by limiting it to reflect. Because a lot of people look at what's happening in California, and some people go, cool, man. But a lot of people say, you know, yes.
So you're saying that if employers can't discriminate against medical marijuana users, that truck drivers and police officers can perform their jobs stoned?
Oh, yeah.
You know, you have better sense than that.
Yes. I mean, that's,
Well, where's the language in the law? Somebody's going to attack it one
do
way
you
or the
have an
other.
answer to that, or a
Well,
question?
I was just gonna point out the fact that those same police officers and doctors can be taking Vicodin, which has worse side effects.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know if that's a point.
There's liquor.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a longer debate than we want to get into. We could be up till about 4 a.m.
Oh, no.
For which we will need the drug caffeine. One more?
What does the Constitution say?
The Constitution says absolutely nothing about
Well,
the
then it's okay.
federal government. It says absolutely nothing about the federal government. This is one of the things that I have to remind drug warriors about, is if we're going to be intellectually honest about what the Constitution says, go back to the 18th Amendment. It took an amendment to the Constitution. This was back when the progressives were honest. It took an amendment to the Constitution to have the federal government outlaw alcohol in this country. And yet, ever since 1970, we've had the Controlled Substances Act with zero amendment of the Constitution. So, yeah. Next subject.